You ever wonder why we are in perpetual crisis mode? There's a reason for this. That's because criminal institutions require crises. They need crises to maintain themselves and to thrive. They need the crises to create distractions, to transfer power and wealth to them. They need the crises to grandstand, to make themselves look important. They need crises to do the wealth transfers, to disempower everybody else, thereby empowering themselves. Crises, especially big ones that are controlled, are methods to create the situation to take resources or a person's health, a person's mind, a person's wealth, and transfer that to the so-called leader or the institution. So more recently, we had the big crisis, the whole COVID scam, and that created a situation where they can decide who was necessary and who was not. Who they ran a test run to see if people would actually comply or not under that kind of circumstance. They began to implement medical procedures that would then disempower people in order to, while they're disempowering other people, they could empower themselves. There were people who grandstanded. Now, of course, that didn't work very well. They ended up being despised, but that was the idea. They wanted to grandstand. They wanted to pose themselves as leaders for those who don't have the leadership within themselves, that don't have their own personal sense of direction. You had, you got other examples. You got the 2008 financial crisis. You have 9/11. You have wars. These are all crises that are meant to transfer power and wealth to the institutions or individuals. It's meant to create distractions so that they can do the wealth and power transfers. And it's meant to put people in a perpetual crisis mode. So if they're constantly having all these other things, if they're in a high stress environment, they're not able to develop themselves in such a way that they can actually sit down and think about what's going on. That's what they don't want you to do. They don't want you to think. They want you to be in crisis mode to set the context for the policies. Policies that encourage bigger and more powerful institutions, bigger government, more corrupt government, to have these, like the military industrial complex or the medical industrial complex or the financial complex, with the case of the 2008 crisis that was caused by the Federal Reserve and their cheap credit, which created the situation where banks were engaging in risky loan practices that then created the crisis that then caused the wealth transfer. It was justified under, well, we got to save the economy from an economic depression, that then they turn around and give the bonuses to the CEOs. But again, the crisis, it created a distraction, it created a wealth transfer, it created wealth destruction, and it put people in a crisis mode so that they're more worried about trying to survive instead of looking at the problem. Institutions, criminals in general, and criminal institutions require crises. If you were to take that power away from them, if you were to expose them, expose the Federal Reserve, for example, or expose government agencies, or if you expose the intel, the information war that's going on, if you understand and expose it and you tell people this is what's going on, if you expose Epstein's Island, for example, and understand why all these celebrities are saying the same things because they're all blackmailed into doing so. If you understand this, you understand how these crises are being generated, and you understand the reason why they're being generated. And you also understand your relationship to these situations. Having an understanding of it, you can avoid it. You can then take the power away from the criminals. But first you have to understand what it is.